Hey guys, welcome back. We got another video. This one's going to be a little different than the other two. You guys are used to seeing like Word docs and then a bunch of highlighted text. I wanted to try something simpler since I don't have anything like super deep to dive into today. It's just going to be going over some of like the super recent stuff that we saw happening today, and just some stuff on Twitter that I wanted to like take some commentary, or give some commentary on, because I think that not to pick on anything that I'm going to talk about, but because I think it highlights like some sentiment that we see, and I think it's going to be a good conversation. So without further ado, let's talk about politics and Twitter. Let's get this. So first, we got the $2,000 checks that Trump announced. He called for $2,000 checks and 4,000 for married couples. And what happened after this, I was really hoping that Democrats were going to take full advantage of having precedent to push for $2,000 checks, because it makes no sense. It makes no sense for them to let the opportunity slide, especially because we'll talk about it later, but especially because of how terrible it would make them look. Anyway, let's play
Amend
this.
this bill and increase the ridiculously low $600 to $2,000 or $4,000 for a couple.
So yeah, once I heard that, I was just waiting and waiting, refreshing Twitter to see people responding to this. At first, I was a little worried because, like, I was seeing people talk about the pardons instead, which, like, don't get me wrong, like, those pardons are super important. But I was worried that this was going to get buried, and it didn't, thankfully. So let's
Amend
move
this
on.
bill and increase.
Okay, so what the right response here was going to be, Democrats from Pelosi to Schumer, to AOC and Rashida, like they all went over and started talking about this. So I'll do the key takeaways first. So first is that the best response to Trump telling you that he wants to do $2,000 checks is to say, yeah, like let's do $2,000 checks, right? If you're the Democratic Party and you've been pitching this idea of like pushing for the working people, and at the same time, right, and I highlight it right here, at the same time, there's a lot of people that are upset with Pelosi, especially because when she asked to bump up the 1.8 trillion dollar deal to 2 point, I think 2, when they were asking for more, she had this whole narrative of like, oh, we're not going to let them get away, we want to get more, blah blah blah. And then she started settling after the election for like no stimulus, and then we got $600 stimulus, and like they're okay with that. So it was a lot of bad faith being directed towards Pelosi, like, and rightfully so, because they did cave very fast to these deals, and we'll talk about that also. But anyway, um, swiftly taking action here forces McConnell to agree or to be the bad guy, and not so much just McConnell, but like Republicans overall, right? Like if Democrats are to take the opportunity to be like, yes, we agree with Trump, let's get $2,000 checks out to everybody. The only people that are like really left to disagree are just going to be Republicans, specifically McConnell, because he seems to be the one most against doing anything like this. Anyway, so here are the tweets that they put out. Pelosi says Republicans repeatedly refused to say what amount the president wanted for direct checks. At last, the president has agreed to 2,000. Democrats are ready to bring this to the floor this week by unanimous consent. Um, One thing on this is like she makes this point about like Republicans refuse to say what Trump wanted. I don't know how true that is, but I do know that there were rumors of Trump wanting to do 2,000, and he was told something along the lines of like, don't or it'll blow up negotiations. I honestly should have put that in here to give you guys sources for that. So, just take what I just said with a grain of salt. You can look it up yourself. I'm pretty sure that was like the narrative that was painted. Trump wanted more, but like they didn't ask for more because of the negotiations. Then Schumer goes and says, I'm in. What do you say, Mitch? That's see, like this is where they push the direction towards Mitch, right? Like they push that Mitch McConnell has to be the one to say no. Republicans have to be the ones to deny the $2,000 because Democrats are all for it. The president is all for it, and it's a Republican president, right? It hurts a lot of the GOP to not side with Trump on this, especially if the Democrats are willing to side with Trump, right? It just paints a really bad picture for them, I think, electorally. And I'm sure they realize that. Anyway, let's not get bogged down with ideological offsets and unrelated items and just do this. The American people deserve it. And then it's a tweet from AOC talking about let's do it at Rashida Talib and I already co-wrote the COVID amendment for $2,000 checks. It's ready to go. So that was a discussion on the Democratic side. And I think they handled it exactly the way it should have been handled. When you have an opportunity like this come up and you're representing yourself as like the party for the people and all that, like you can't let the opportunity slide. You can't sit there and say that like Trump can't be the better socialist in this instance, right? You can't let that happen. And I think they realize that. So here's some dissent on the checks, and this is a dumb take from Project Lincoln senior advisor. I was originally gonna blur out her handle, but I mean she's verified, has like 100,000 followers. So at the very least, I think criticism is good, and especially when you're in a position on something like Project Lincoln, it's totally fair to like point out some really bad takes that you can get from these people. So the tweet was, oh, the 2K is tied to Trump and his veto, not the squad? Count me out. I'd rather be homeless than take one damn dime of blood money from that monster for stimulus I didn't need. This one I will rush a deposit to avoid stuff bouncing, but at least it wasn't coming from him. Gross. So there's a few things here. First, the money isn't tied to anyone, and if there ever was an argument to be made about who it's tied to the taxpayers. We fund this, and if like you say like, oh no, because this is running a deficit, like we will pay for the deficit. That's what taxes are for. It only makes sense that in a time of crisis, the government is willing to overspend for their people who have been funding everything they do the entire time. So, second point is that saying you'd rather be homeless is a slap in the face to everyone who's struggling and stressed out of their mind right now. And I think one of the other tweets she makes is that she was at one point in time homeless, and so like criticizing her for like making this point about homelessness is doesn't make sense because she's been homeless. But I think there's a response to that. Like there's a lot of people who were at some point in their life in poverty and then they get out of poverty and they manage to become extraordinarily wealthy. And then they have like a disconnect between what life was like before then and then after they became wealthy, right? It seems like after some point in time you kind of lose, you have the memory of it but it doesn't stick the way it does when you're experiencing it in the moment. Not only that, but like I mean there's plenty of examples of like people that are suffering from oppression being willing to continue in that oppression for whatever reason, mainly off of ignorance, right? And so it's the same instance here, right? Just because like you've experienced homelessness does not mean that you can't be criticized for like saying something like I prefer homelessness to getting money from Trump. It's ridiculous, right? Like people need to pay their bills or they're literally going to die. Their life is worth more than just like some sort of vanity or pride about like not getting money with Trump's name on it. And then lastly, when we make politics about the politicians and not about the people, we lose. Yeah. So this is, I think, a perfect way of like summarizing why this type of take is problematic, in my opinion. Um, when politics is about having good ideas that does good for people, right? Like running a government and governing effectively is why you should be a politician. And if someone presents a good idea, it doesn't matter what we think of them as a person, right? Because the idea itself is good. And this is an idea that people on the left have been pushing for so long. We have Bernie, AOC, Rashida, we have literally anyone that you can think of. And that's just the people in government. The people on the left that have been pushing from outside government have been asking for more retroactive benefits. Like, it's ridiculous to think that just because this came out of Trump's mouth, that somehow the money is tainted. Now, next, the dumb take continues. So then she goes on to say, it blows my mind that people are lining up behind Trump because he's manipulating them with this $2,000 stimulus bullshit. All he is doing is working PR for his coup. He set out the entire legislative process, then waits till the bill is passed to pull this out. It's nuts. I think there's a simple response here, and I won't take as long on this one. The coup can't happen, right? Like, we've already had the Electoral College vote. Mitch McConnell already recognized Biden as president-elect. There is no coup. Trump can whine all he wants on Twitter. There is no coup. He's lost like 59 lawsuits, and only won one. And the one lawsuit that he ended up winning netted him like 84 votes in Wisconsin. So yeah, no, like this isn't doing him any good. Let's see. The real good that comes from the checks is more meaningful than the potential harm she mentions. Yeah, like that says it really well. The benefits that people are going to get from being able to pay rent, from being able to pay for food, from doing all the things that they need to do right now, are more meaningful than the risk of harm that comes from like having stimulus money with Trump's name, right? Because at the end of the day, one is a probability, one is a guarantee. If you guys remember the last video, we went over the stats on how people were spending their money. People spent, of the first $1,200, people spent, I think, 600 in the first 3 days, is what we said yesterday on the video. So clearly, like, this money is super important. We're 9 months into the COVID pandemic, and we've only had stimulus for $1,200 and $600 weekly unemployment benefits. And like, clearly people are in dire straits when we look at like how high poverty has risen. I think it's up 2%. Like, poverty has risen the highest that it has in the last 60 years. Man, don't quote me on this. These are statistics that I like glanced over and I don't remember super well. Um, but poverty has like been climbing really fast. Um, and lastly, it doesn't matter if he's acting in bad faith as long as we capitalize and force the GOP to either pass or be responsible for killing the relief. Yeah. So at worst case scenario is we do something political here, which is just use Trump's language as a way to like pin the GOP into a position of either like increasing the benefits to everybody or they're responsible for not passing relief. Right? There isn't a scenario where this blows back, at least in my opinion, towards the Democratic side when they're pushing stuff like, yeah, we're ready to vote unanimously on this. So that's the dumb take. And the last thing I want to talk about is going to be Biden's role. I think there's 2 slides on this. So you might be wondering, oh, what do you mean Biden's role? Well, Biden did some pretty scummy stuff. Turns out Biden played a role in nudging Dems towards a lowball offer that at the time didn't even have checks included. So here's what I wanted to point out. Mr. Biden, on December 2nd, threw his support behind the $900 billion plan being pushed by the centrist group. The total was less than half of the $2 trillion that Speaker Nancy Pelosi and Senator Chuck Schumer, Democrat of New York, had been insisting on. So Biden literally went to these negotiations and said, yeah, we'll settle for $900 billion. That was the grand plan of negotiation, right? And this was December 2nd, right? So if you guys remember back to December 2nd, that was before stimulus was even part of the deal. That was when state funding was included, and that was when we had the immunity for corporations. So this was a while back. Since then, we've made a lot of progress in improving the bill, and clearly now with what's going on, it's taking a step in the right direction. Lastly, adding the checks. So Bernie and Holly from the Senate, and then Jayapal and the Progressive Caucus in the House did a lot of work to getting checks included. Prior to 2000, this is just the $600 checks. Prior to these pushes, the $900 billion bill did not even include stimulus checks. It's partially thanks to these efforts that we are here today. So Pramila Jayapal texted Pelosi in early December that her group would oppose the stimulus proposal if it did not contain some form of direct payment. This was printed in Chicago Tribune right here, December 22nd. So yesterday. It's 12:30 in the morning. So yeah, yesterday. And then next we have Bernie Sanders and Josh Hawley push for a second round of stimulus. They want a $1,200 check for Americans, and I highlighted the stuff I'm reading now. But yeah, so that was the situation we're looking at coming from this. Actually, I don't have the citation here, but this is from a article on The Hill. Let me see if I can bring it onto the screen. It's going to be this article right here. So that's what's going on. There we go. But yeah, guys, I appreciate you all watching this, and thanks again. To summarize, it's been an interesting day, to say the least. We've had a lot of really good stuff come up, and then it seems like Democrats are really pushing to get this taken care of, and so hopefully that follows through. I'm going to do some updates. Let me know what the PowerPoint style looks like to you guys. And let's see, what's the time we're running on? 15 minutes? Wow, time flies. But yeah, let me know how this style of presenting the information is to you guys. We can do a blend of both what I've been doing with the documents. We can do one or the other. We can do just PowerPoints. Just, give me feedback on what you all think, and we'll get it done. Thanks again for watching, and have a wonderful night, guys. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, all that, and peace.